we've been, as I call, stuck on the platform for another 10 years. And that period, of course, coincides also with other, you know, and other more political, cultural, and economic forms of stagnation, or, to use a better word, regression, right? So, in that situation, yeah, it's not very, what shall we say, likely that especially young people will just rebel, create some kind of underground movement, hide or disappear into a subculture, and kind of ignore the mainstream, right? So the problem of this absence of mainstream and underground, is one of the main reasons why we're in a situation like this. And uh, th- these kind of sophisticated forms of stagnation, have led us to, well, not only that we made no progress at all with climate change, although all the warnings were there 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And a bit it's the same, like, in the case of the internet, and these almost inevitable forms of concentration of power, centralization, monopolization, or and of course that comes from both the state and the corporation. So it's very often very weird combinations of platform dependency and state surveillance, right? These are so even though they do not necessarily cooperate, they happen, um, in parallel, and definitely when they're happening both at the same time, um, this creates a feeling that you know we're surveilled, but we don't know where to go. Yeah, I very much with agree with Mark Fisher, and but this is a real problem, and this is by no means something that is easy to admit or easy to explore. We are not just observing some kind of phenomena, like we do in anthropology, that is outside of us, that we can explore and think of as something, at least something that is outside us, maybe not necessarily something exotic or alien, but at least there is a distinction between us and the thing we are talking about and that we study. Now, why is Mark Fisher such a unique person? Because he did a lot of unpleasant soul searching, and young people seem to recognize that he is one of the few who did this, but that most others are maybe unwilling, incapable of precisely doing this, because it is not so easy to admit that you are stuck, and that the gestures, let's say, of resistance and protest and underground and being alternative for different, uh, when they no longer are very meaningful. The first, let's say, roughly speaking, 15 years were one in which we thought that internet could be applied for many different forms of solutions. The solution, for instance, of the centralized media question, the solution of decentralized infrastructures and logistics and distribution systems, and so on and so on, right? And yeah, with the rise of platform capitalism, we have seen completely different mechanisms at play. And yes, it took, and maybe it's still going on, but it took at least 10 years to, fully face this situation we're in right now, that the internet might be part of the problem and not part of the solution. In the pharmakon vision, these two things are intertwined and are entangled, and so that's important to understand. Um, so where we see the problem, there's always also a first sign, at least on the horizon of a solution. And yeah, that this is what Bernard Stiegler has taught me, and not just me, many others. And I happened to work together with him in the last 7 years of his life, starting with our encounter precisely in this context we are in again right now. And this was in 2012, 13, when we were running the Unlike Us initiative or network
Mhm.
that was focused on social media critique and the development of alternatives, right? So the critique of Facebook and Twitter and so on is now a good decade old, and yeah, this in itself is something that can be disheartening and can make us sad, because we haven't made so much progress since then. But um, at the time, Bernard Stiegler was really embodying the two uh, in his persona, in his works, in the things that he did in his own writings, and in Ars Industrialis, in his Technics and Time, and in Eerie. So I contrast these two things a little bit, because obviously he didn't put much space in his own work for all the developments that he was deeply involved in on the alternative side. It's not exactly metaphorical, because I'm involved in these social movements, and obviously, the strategies of the social movements is something that has, dominated my work for over 40 years. So, being involved in a lot of the movements, this is always on my mind, and that's of course. An element I share very much with Franco Berardi, and maybe a little bit less so with um, Bernard. But I would also say he was very much involved in that, and a lot of people maybe they haven't really studied carefully, his deep struggles he had with the question of the rise of Le Pen. Now, let's say 10, 12 years ago, where he published a number of books, even, and this question of how to deal with, really hegemonic, extreme right wing populism. is something, that is, yeah, that is, really part of his work. Of course, it's his political work, but yeah. So this question of, what kind of movements, what kind of strategies should be developed is important, and it can also be Black Lives Matter for that matter. Of course, it's nice that there's Extinction Rebellion and that there's the element of extinction is there. So there's a direct link to, the collapsology. But lately, I start to use this idea, which is kind of a perversion, I have to admit, of Benjamin Breton, when I talk about the stack of crises,
Mhm.
because I no longer believe that, the way he has defined the stack is of any use today, nor, for that matter, the technical engineering version of that stack, which of course, Benjamin Burton used to as a source of inspiration when he wrote the stack. Right? There's a technical stack. This is a technical term that has been around for the last 30 or 40 years. So this is already a very well known and established idea that there are so many different layers from from the cables to yeah, all the way up to the desktop, to the interface, and ultimately to the profile and the user itself, right? So that notion of the stack, also particularly software wise, is well spread. However, these days I believe that there is some kind of a stack of crises as well, right? And there are a lot of movements that yeah, respond to that, are part of that, and are resisting it, and are trying to address the issues and change it. And obviously, one of them is also the whole question of you know racism, leading up to probably something like legacy of slavery and colonialism, obviously imperialism of the 19th and early 20th century,
Mhm.
leading to, yeah, to this movement called Black Lives Matter, which I myself don't want to reduce to just a question of identity. I believe that we can always create new communities and new experience, a social experience. That's why I strongly believe with Tiziana Terranova that there is something like the techno-social, and that it can be created, that it exists, and that it will materialize. Right? Uh, in the case of network nostalgia, we have to see also that the nostalgia of communities that existed maybe in 90s or afterwards, or things like in the media, things like that, uh, which really existed at the time, right? These were not just phantoms. These social movements are anything but phantoms, in the same way as Black Lives Matter was not a phantom, and the Last Generation and Extinction Rebellion at the moment are real existing social structures and movements that are active and shape the things to come. So, but we can say that there are certain nostalgia, forms of nostalgia that maybe are related to the tools, the software, and maybe even we could say today the platforms that we used at at the time. And so the nostalgia is something about a world, that is lost and is no longer there. And we, of course, with anything that we long back for, we can try to recreate it. We can try to create some substitutes, or we can build, rightly so, we can build monuments in remembrance of things past, which, of course, I'm also doing.
mm,
I'm writing at the moment, my personal history of the 1990s, and
mhm,
hopefully that book will, come out at some point. And it's not so hard, yeah, to list the, table of content of that book, because, yeah, I have, of course, already written quite a bit about the 90s so far, and you can find a lot about it in the first book under my name, in Dark Fiber, and
mhm,
in in part also in my first recession, which are all kind of reworkings of this turbulent time of the 90s, before September 11 and the dot-com crash. So, yeah, so network nostalgia is then something, which would say, okay, we need to go away from Twitter, and we need to use email again. Mm, Something like that, and have thriving email lists and so on, right? That would be, but we also know that already in for the millennials, something like that existed, right? Where they were are nostalgic about Tumblr, that no longer exists, or MySpace for that matter, or the whole world of blogs that no longer exists, and was interconnected through RSS feeds and so on and so on, right? And we can even today feel that, there's a certain Twitter nostalgia latent. There are references without an original, because we could say, okay, have the debates with the accelerationists really happen, and if so, where can we find them? Now that is quite a difficult question. Because maybe they happened somewhere, maybe on blogs, quite likely, very likely, on mailing lists, mm, maybe not, not anymore. Uh, on social media, Facebook, maybe. Well, good luck, reconstructing them. I would say there is probably very difficult to find a trace of them. So, so the accelerationist debate is something, that especially future generations will find very, very difficult, because we have not, properly documented it, let alone centralized it, let alone staged it, because it's even more important to stage it. So, maybe we could. One way of looking at it is to say that the real accelerationist debates are the ones that are still ahead of us. That not lie in the past, but will become even more rigorous, important, and serious. Maybe what we had in the last 5 years, 7 years was tiny, and was maybe in preparation of the serious questions to come. Because in a serious global crisis, um, it is no longer a joke to talk about the socialization, or nationalization, for that matter, of something like Amazon. Yeah, that yeah, we maybe a few years ago, this was still kind of a rare, a strange, kind of radical gesture or something like that, right? But even in the times of COVID, there were moments that we were almost there, right? And even now, during the Ukraine war, we come to certain positions that we would never think of. The whole idea of austerity and neoliberal kind of minimal state. I mean, everybody, you know, everybody. There's a huge consensus that this is a joke. This is not actual what's going on at this moment, right? Uh, the state is playing an incredibly important coordinating role, whether you like it or not, whether you're right-wing libertarian or you know some kind of a liberal market economist. People have seen, especially during the COVID and after COVID, that there's an incredible um, activity happening around very serious state interventions. Now again with inflation, now again with the energy crisis, you name it, it doesn't stop. It will no longer stop, right? So this raises the question whether the accelerationist debates, maybe should maybe be modified or should be restaged, or you could also say staged because they were never really staged. Uh, and and deal with the present, because the present, in its geopolitical complexity, maybe asks for a lot of accelerationist interventions, such as a takeover of infrastructure and logistics, the question of the role of centralized planning, and but as there are more and more people working on this, rightly so, especially in Germany, but also in other countries.